Welcome back to the Impact Show. I am coming to you from the Balboa Bay Club. Tonight we're hosting Speaker Mike Johnson. It's so exciting with all that's going on in the world to have a speaker that's so good at uniting a nation around topics that are so relevant. As you know, I've been in Washington, D.C. a lot lately with our new frontier. There's so much evolving with job growth, with economic growth in America around industries like artificial intelligence, biotech, robotics, all the great things happening in reindustrialization, digital currency in this administration. Although this is not a political show, it's obvious that I have relationships in Washington. And I'm always excited about bridging policymakers with founders and venture capitalists and what I've been calling the new frontier. I give a lot of credit to our friends at Type 1 Ventures with the Frontier conference that they hosted at Mar-a-Lago that really gave birth to this movement way back in 2024. And since then, I've been interviewing founders and others that are investing into this new frontier movement that is helping our country's GDP growth, job growth, and everything our administration is working for. Artificial intelligence is at the root of that. Everyone is now immersed into it, whether you're a consumer, a business, a government. And I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to interview Ben Wolff, who's co-founder and CEO of Palladyne AI. And Ben, welcome to Orange County, welcome to Newport Beach, and to a momentous day. Maybe you could tell our audience a little bit about your background, who you are, and how you got into the business.
Sure. Thanks for having me today. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it's obviously great weather here today.
Yes.
So I am a lawyer by training. Don't hold that against me. But early in my career, I got involved in the telecommunications space and had the good fortune of partnering with a group of guys that had originally founded McCaw Cellular, which became what is now known today as AT&T Wireless. Mm-hmm. And so I was on the early kind of forefront of the wireless movement. I had the good fortune of becoming a co-founder of a company called Clearwire, which was the first 4G wireless carrier across the US. Became the first CEO and took the company public. Ultimately, we sold that company to Sprint and to SoftBank for $14 billion. From there, I got to run a satellite communications company. I did a lot of different things, formed a lot of different companies, all kind of on the cutting edge of tech. Mm-hmm. In the mid-2010s, I was running a private equity fund and had a thesis that there were opportunities to invest in defense tech. And this is when defense tech was not cool or sexy.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time with the corporate groups at a number of the big defense contractors, the big primes. Got to know the guys at Raytheon really well. And they had a robotics division that they had owned for 7 years. Mm-hmm. And they were interested in selling it.
Right.
So my wife and I got to partner with the management team, did a management buyout, and bought the robotics division of Raytheon. Back then it was called Raytheon Sarcos. So we spun that business out and started focusing on dual-use robotics technologies that would have relevance both in the commercial sector and in the industrial or in the defense sector. Fast forward to where we are today, the business has pivoted away from hardware platforms to primarily focusing on artificial intelligence that makes machines smarter.
Right.
So going back to my telecom days, think about the difference between basic phones and smartphones.
Right.
We make basic robots become smart robots.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think having that telecommunications background and integrating that into this modern form of autonomous AI for industrial, commercial, and defense applications is fantastic. Growing up in my career, Deutsche Telekom T-Mobile was one of our biggest clients, so I learned a lot about triangular, the way that cell moves through a triangle, right? And a lot of people drive past cell sites, but the complexity and how these nodes are carried through these triangulation is fascinating. And there was always like this 2-mile zone, and it was like this modern form of real estate where every time you could land a cell tower, whether you were Sprint, Nextel, AT&T, or T-Mobile, it was a land grab. And so for us, doing public relations and government affairs for T-Mobile was very interesting because we were using these local government relationships to get cell sites and by schools, by home associations, by churches, and it was like a landlord, paying real estate value because these organizations were collecting income by having a cell site there. And obviously, cell has moved into all sorts of territories. So the way that this signal transforms, you've been able to take some of that domain knowledge and bring it into an AI business. Now, autonomy is something that a lot of people throw out and talk about. We see the robotics industry taking shape. It seems like a very expensive industry to get into, to build the physical robot, be it a humanoid or something in an industrial environment. Can you talk a little bit about the autonomy and how these bots are working with other bots? Is there a term where autonomy is working with autonomy? Because I've yet to see that. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like and how Palladyne plays a role in that?
Sure. So the terminology matters in this space. And just like all software is not the same, when somebody says software, it could mean a million different kinds of software.
Right.
The same is true when you talk about automation. or autonomy or collaborative autonomy. And we see that as a continuum. And in our world, the big difference between automation and autonomy is who's making the decision. With automation, which is what you see, like if you go look at an automobile assembly line and you see automation there, robots doing the same thing over and over again.
Right.
All of the decision making was made by the human beings that programmed those robots.
Right.
They wrote the code, and all the decision making was done up front. And so the robot doesn't have any ability to make a decision. In our world, what we do is we enable robots to have autonomy, which means they can make the decision. So if they come across something they're not familiar with, they know they have the knowledge and reasoning capability, just like we humans do, to decide what to do next.
Right.
So that's the big difference between automation and autonomy.
Right.
Now, where we've taken it,
So it's not waiting on a human to make that decision for them.
That's right.
Wow.
Now you go another step, though, and what we do with drones, for example, for the military, is we've created what we call collaborative autonomy. And that's where many drones can be in the sky at the same time, or frankly, mobile robots on the ground. It doesn't have to be drones in the sky. And they share information, highly valuable, curated information, so that in a swarm context, they can have the collective intelligence of the entire swarm.
Right.
And they can act based on that intelligence while communicating with each other.
Right, right. So going back to terminology, is there a term for the collaborative autonomy?
That actually is the term.
That's what it's called,
So when you talk to
collaborative
people
autonomy.
in the
Okay.
Department of War,
Okay.
they're talking about collaborative
Okay.
autonomy.
Right.
Different services refer to it in different ways. So in the context of the Army looking at swarming drones, they actually have another term they call Wolff pack autonomy.
Okay.
Or Wolff pack swarming.
Sure.
And that kind of gives you a good visual image. You have
Right.
all these wolves. Different wolves might take a different leadership position based on what the pack needs to do.
Right.
That's exactly what we enable with our swarms.
So clearly we see it in defense applications with drone co-autonomy. How about other industrial or commercial applications? Can you give us other real-world examples where this co-autonomy exists and where you see it going in the next 3 to 5 years?
So we're on the cutting edge of collaborative autonomy. I don't see many other companies even talking about it.
Right.
We really are on the outer edge of what's possible. Where does it go? Ultimately, all of these machines that need to be autonomous will benefit from having, in effect, a mesh network of knowledge.
Right.
We've been inspired by what we see from nature, what you see ants in a colony do, or bees in a hive do. You have all of these individual insects, but all communicating with each other on a non-centralized basis or a decentralized basis. That's the model that we've employed. We use it on swarms today, but ultimately, whether it's self-driving cars or whether it's humanoid robots working in a factory,
Right.
the more they can share information, that's the smarter they will all be, and that's what we think is the model for the future.
That's awesome. And so this is Palladyne's core differential in the market. I've never heard a business that actually does this. Can you talk a little bit about the structure of Palladyne? What sort of business are you, and who is your customer at the end of the day?
Sure. So we have two sides of our business. First of all, I should point out we're a publicly traded company. We're a small cap company, traded on NASDAQ. We have two core areas of focus. One is on the commercial and industrial side, where we're primarily focused on making robots that are bolted to the floor smarter and more capable so that they can be trained easily to do a lot of different tasks.
Right.
And that's our commercial sector,
Right.
focused on manufacturing. Then we have our defense and aerospace business, which is primarily focused on machines that move, in the first instance, drones that fly. So software is kind of what drives us, our artificial intelligence software. We've also beefed up our defense business so that we are vertically integrated.
Right.
We have everything from engineering capabilities to design loitering munitions and missiles at a speed that really nobody else can touch, all the way through components that we manufacture for other prime defense contractors like avionics and compute power for missiles and loitering drones.
Right.
And then we have manufacturing capabilities where we're making components for the F-35 and the F-15 and the Bradley vehicle and a wide range of things. So we are now vertically integrated. We understand what the Department of War has been talking about
Right.
from the perspective of reshoring manufacturing, reducing risk in our supply chain. So we manufacture a lot of our own stuff.
So you mentioned, and I've been around the defense industry for 30 years, Mega Electronics and a lot of the defense primes I've worked with in my career. You mentioned that defense tech never was sexy, and I couldn't agree more until just a few years ago. It's really taken off. Obviously, a lot of people know me because of my friendship with Palmer Luckey. I've interviewed him 10 times on the show already. What has led to that sexiness? Why is there an edge now all of a sudden on defense tech? And I'd love to get your perspective on that.
I think a lot of this is the mentality of our single biggest customer in the defense tech space, which is the Pentagon.
Right.
I think that what you saw in Trump's first term, and certainly even more so now, an openness and a desire to do things differently. Nobody questions that we need our large defense primes to thrive and prosper because as a matter of national security, we need them to all be successful. But we also understand that procurement and requirements writing has been done the same way for decades.
Right.
And those big defense primes have all been geared with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees to work with that existing system.
Right.
President Trump comes in and says, we're doing things differently,
Right.
in a lot of different ways, but particularly in the Department of what was then Defense and now War, and says, let's do things differently. Let's make things faster. Let's get new technologies introduced faster. It's not easy for battleships to turn quickly.
Right.
But it is easy for smaller boats to turn more quickly.
Sure.
And so I think there's been this opportunity and a receptiveness at the Department of War for new technologies to be able to come to market faster.
Right.
If we didn't have the Pentagon willing to work differently, I don't think all of these defense tech companies would have been funded. Right. So that it's really a matter of policy and direction from the White House that has enabled this new ecosystem to thrive.
Right. And I think why businesses like yours and Anduril and others are valued so well in now and in the future is really around this lack of entitlement, right? So you don't have these tens of thousands of employees on pension. You don't have an old world mentality in the way that you work your business. And it's tough, and just a few weeks ago, I interviewed Tom O'Leary, who'll be here tonight. He's the founder and CEO of Jet Zero, which is a man array looking total evolvement of the commercial aircraft. And the reason why we've been flying in tubes for so many years is because the assembly and the way that you set it up, it just no one could break that. And now there's a couple strong contenders in it, Jet Zero, Nautilus, and they're attracting billions in funding, and they're building a brand new assembly. The same way you're reinventing military and defense tech, not just for national defense, but for industrial and commercial and enterprise. And I think that those are the companies that the DoW, the Pentagon, and government agencies like working with. It's fast, it's quick, there isn't a lot of excess spend. And so those making decisions on behalf of the administration are more likely to side with organizations that have a faster consumption to the budget and a faster product delivery. And it's tougher to do that with primes that have this legacy debt that's built that they have to get through before they can even provide value to that RFP or that project. So continued success there. Now, given all the adversity that's going on in the world, and I mean, we're sitting center in a war right now with Iran, with the strikes coming from Israel and the United States, and all this friction, war, whether they're small things or if they're large things like Ukraine and Russia, it seems like defense is at its strongest, at least in my lifetime, and I can't remember a time that there's been more conflict happening. On one end, it's very unnerving, and I know the United States position is posturing itself to defend itself, for the long term, as opposed to waiting for a bad thing to happen. And right now we're in this conflict. I'd love to get your perspective on how things are going in the world. I've been hearing drone technology. In fact, there's a drone threat on California right now as we speak that law enforcement has been putting on. So this seems to be a time where Paladine plays a very important role for our country. Beyond just being a company, it's an intellectual property and an advantage that we're trying to have as a nation. Can you give me your thoughts on all this conflict that's happening in the world and how Paladine plays a role in it?
So, I mean, everybody understands there's more conflict going on now than we've seen in a long time. We're also handling it better, in my opinion, as a nation than we've ever done it before. We are demonstrating with overwhelming force and demonstrating our capabilities. Mm-hmm. A lot of that is being driven by new technologies. Not all of it, but certainly a lot of it.
Sure.
And I think the war in Ukraine demonstrated how important innovation is. Mm-hmm. And it's, I think the government is open to learning lessons across the board, whether it's what's happening in Ukraine, what happened in Israel last fall. There's all kinds of opportunities for new technologies and new companies to be able to contribute and make a difference. So I think that the landscape has evolved quickly in terms of our role in this. Some of the technologies that we've been able to field and demonstrate today are things that prior administrations thought wouldn't be possible until the mid-2030s. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that's interesting about the way the Pentagon has worked historically is they understand kind of a future roadmap, but the glide path might be very different because of the application of private capital.
Sure.
And that's what's exciting about the defense tech space right now.
Yeah.
So we're delivering something today that I think some folks thought wouldn't be available until the mid-2030s, if even then.
Right.
My biggest job as the CEO of this company, and our entire team's biggest job, is to just get the word out that this capability exists today. Because while I think we're first in the world to have it, they don't have this in Ukraine. I don't believe they have it in China. I don't believe the Russians have it. But the fact that we're demonstrating that it exists means everybody else is going to try and do it. And I got to tell you, just since my company started getting more and more publicity, the amount of challenge that my IT firm has, my internal IT group has in fending off, frankly, the attacks that we're getting from all the likely sources has gone through the roof.
Right.
we are in the lead right now, and we have an opportunity to maintain that lead, but we need the government to understand this technology exists, and let's go put fuel on that fire and really make it take off.
Right. So back to the conflict that's going on right now, do you see an end in sight as it relates to the use of defense tech and then phasing it out? Or is this something that you see happening and then maintaining a presence of defense tech around the region that just had a conflict for a long period of time? And one of my questions to you as well is, one of my friends is very involved with a defense robotics company called Figure. They were just featured in Time yesterday. And there seems to be a potential executive order coming in on humanoids being in the first line of defense. Can you give me a little bit of perspective on the recovery after a war and how autonomy and robotics and AI plays in the maintenance, as opposed, and like panning the camera to decades ago in Iran or Afghanistan and some of these conflicts where we had troops on ground? Do you envision a day that AI and autonomy and robotics maintains the peace?
So let me start with your first question. I think that now that the dam has broken and there is an openness to trying new technologies and to trying to cycle things through the process faster, we're never going back to the old way of doing things. I think that defense tech is here to stay. So that's a great opportunity, and it's good for the country and good for the world. In terms of the role of robotics and automation and autonomy, the fact is people don't really like doing manual labor. They don't like doing dangerous and risky jobs. They don't like kind of boring jobs. A lot of what you're talking about in terms of the rebuilding process can be done increasingly by autonomous machines. Now, I'll tell you, it's a long time before we see Terminators running around, or Rosie the Robot, or take whatever science fiction you want to think about. We're a long ways away from that. But I do believe that we're going to see robots, autonomous robots, take increasingly important roles in being able to do those dangerous, difficult, and boring jobs that humans don't want to do.
Right. A couple of industries that I'm following closely on the investment side, as well as some of the representation of our firm, is space, as well as subterranean. Any thoughts and perspective on that, on those two industries, and how autonomy and potentially Paladine can play a role in those markets?
I think that whether it's space, under the sea, or subterranean, you've got very, very hostile environments to the human beings. And given our aspirations, whether it's what Elon Musk wants to do with Mars, or whether it's some of these really innovative companies looking at things under the sea, I think we're going to continue to push the envelope, but these are inhospitable environments in many cases for humans. What a perfect place for autonomous machines.
Right.
It doesn't get any better than
That's
that.
what I'm thinking.
That's just an extremely great set of use cases. So I think that those are actually environments where I think we will be adopting things even faster, because we don't see the risk to humans. Right. And if a machine frankly craps out on us,
sure,
we haven't lost human life.
Right. And there's an ethical side to weapons, AI, and autonomy, especially when nodes carrying weapons are, through AI, having a conversation with nodes carrying weapons.
Yeah.
Can you give me your perspective on those, especially those that are far off in the conspiracy worlds, on the ethical sides of this conversation, this debate? I certainly have a position on it. I think AI for autonomy is a great thing, and there are many use cases that prove that this is a safe thing. But what are your thoughts on that?
So first of all, we have coined the term ethical embodied AI, and that's everything that we're focused on, which is how do we put AI in the real world out there that is ethical by nature. And we don't leave that up to the machine or to the algorithms to decide what's ethical. We build it into the architecture of what we do. And what I mean by that is, when you take a look at most of the AI that consumers are familiar with, which is like an OpenAI, ChatGPT kind of construct, those are big algorithms that live in the cloud, and they're putting more and more power and compute behind them, and they have to be able to answer any question you might ask. And they wind up having the sum total of human knowledge at their disposal to answer that question. They can do that because those algorithms reside in these massive data centers all over the world. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about putting intelligence on a machine, we're talking about something that's generally the size of us humans or smaller.
Right.
The amount of compute power on board, the amount of actual electrical power on board is so constrained. And that's the world that we live in. Mm-hmm. So we don't have this brute force, massive data center kind of approach, because everything we do lives on the edge.
Right.
So that's the edge part of our AI. It's embodied in a machine.
Sure.
Where does the ethical part come in? It comes in because we constrain the jobs that those machines can do. So when I put my algorithms on a drone, all it can do is help that drone fly and perhaps prioritize targets and follow those targets. It can't make any decision beyond that, because by definition we're so constrained with the compute power. So that's the ethical part. What we're focused on is how do we produce weapon systems or subsystems for weapons that enhance the likelihood of mission success while diminishing the risk of unintended consequences or collateral damage. I don't know many companies that are focused on that.
Sure.
That's everything we live, eat, and breathe, is how do we help humans make decisions about completing a mission that enhances the likelihood of success while diminishing the risk of unintended consequences, with a human always making the ultimate decision on a go, no-go basis.
That's fantastic. And for our audience, that was a great way to unpack the ethical perspective and debate in a way that makes sense and is practical and can be used to defend those conspiracy theorists that think your cyber car or your cyber taxi is going to drive you off a cliff. Just remember that came on the Impact Show. And that being said, I'm also spending a lot of time in the energy space. One of my good friends who you'll meet soon is Isaiah Taylor, the founder of Valor Atomics. So him and the Secretary of Energy and the President just recently launched modular nuclear in Utah. Tell me your thoughts on power, because all this AI and all this compute is going to require more resources. Is the country ready for this? Any thoughts on the power side?
Well, if you look at the big data center AI, which I think is essential to our competitiveness, a lot of companies doing great work there.
Right.
There's no question our power grid is not yet ready for that. So we have to find innovative solutions. When you talk about moving intelligence onto a machine, we are very much power constrained. I was walking the halls of the Pentagon a few years back, and a very senior Department of Defense then official said to me, "So when can you make your exoskeleton fly like Iron Man?"
Right.
And my response was, as soon as you get me the arc reactor. Power drives everything.
Sure.
It certainly drives compute capabilities. So the more we can reduce the size and make it safer, the more relevant it will be. So I'm all for seeing huge advancements in energy capabilities and technology.
Cool. So this show I created many years ago about how founders and CEOs and people building enterprise face adversity, how you face the challenge and overcome it, because every one of us have that in common as enterprise leaders. Tell us a little about your organization, your thoughts, and what's your moat? How are you able to protect what you've got, and how are you able to differentiate yourself for the long term?
First and foremost, and probably all of your guests say this, it's about the people. Your people are your moat. If you're developing a new technology or a new capability, attract the best talent you can. Make sure you figure out how to retain them. If they walk out the door, your knowledge goes out the door too. So it's essential to have a great team and to figure out what it takes to motivate them and retain them. So I would say that my secret weapon right now is my people. We've also been fortunate to translate the people into some patented technologies, so we have ownership of these technologies. I mentioned to you before our swarming AI capability. We've been really fortunate to have the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office issue patents that cover that. It's pretty hard to do, to get software algorithms protected. So I think we've got something that's very novel and unique. More than that, though, it's what led to that. We took an approach about artificial intelligence that was driven from my company's 40 years of history in the robotics space, where we were working on hardware systems. And the whole concept, the architecture was created from the notion that we were creating this exoskeleton, Iron Man, if you will, and we needed to figure out how to train it by just being worn by a human, and then allow the human to step outside of it and to be able to then function as a humanoid robot without a human inside of it. That took a different thought process. We had to approach AI from an entirely different vector. I don't think that you could take 10 of the smartest PhD students out of any university program that's focused on AI and put them in a garage with all the money in the world, and they would have come up with our approach. So we have 30 or 40 years of hard learning and experience that got us to this point. I think that put us in a great spot.
So to the thousands of entrepreneurs watching this segment, think about what he said. People, patents, and grit. You got to have that if you want that long term. I've definitely done those. Not the patents as much, but definitely the people and the grit. And you're going to get kicked when you're down, and you got to find a way to get up. And that's part of being an entrepreneur. And maybe just in my closing couple questions, Ben, I've got thousands of entrepreneurs watching this, and a lot of them want their own Paladine. Any advice that you have for the next generation, for the people watching the show, on how to build their own Paladine and what it takes?
Most important, turn a no into a yes. I mean, you're going to be told no over and over and over again. I don't know how many pitches I've made to raise capital or pitches to hire people or whatever it is. And there's always some reason for people to say no. Find a way to make the no your superpower. Make it the thing that motivates you to come back and say, I'm going to prove you wrong. It's a mindset that's not natural because you get down when you're told no. But if you can view that no as a motivating factor to get you out of bed in the morning and say, I'm going to show those people that told me no that it can be done, that I was right, that I can't be beat down, That attitude is the single best thing that you can do.
I think that is the first time ever in the show's history where someone said exactly what I always say. Like, exactly. No means yes in my mind, because there's always a compromise. Even if someone says no to you and they write you back, they're still communicating with you. So there's that little wiggle room in there. And being persistent and being patient. My wife is half Japanese. She taught me the patient side. It's something that you have to curate and you have to be attentive to. And if you're persistent, and I was telling someone the other day, like when I first started my career, it was 9 no's to 1 yes. Now it's 1 no to 9 yeses. And it's a product of 30 years of consistency, of grit, being good to people, having that integrity in your heart and delivering value. That's very, very important. 3 to 5 years from now, what does Palladyne look like? What does the world of AI autonomy look like? Let's close with that question.
So I told you about my telecom experience. I think about what we're doing with AI as kind of the last mile, which is what I was focused on, the last mile of delivery of communications. In my case, I'm delivering the last mile of intelligence today. I think we'll always have these AI, large language models that live in the cloud, but they're going to interface with the intelligence that also lives on the machine. And so where do I want to be 3 to 5 years from now? I want to see that our AI, it has become like the Microsoft of machine intelligence. Take all these machines that are basic in nature, make them smart. Similar to the transition that we saw from the IBM mainframe to the personal computer. That was about moving intelligence and capability to the edge. That's exactly what we're doing. We're just at the next iteration of that.
That's awesome, Ben. Well, thank you again for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Thanks to Orange County, California. Thank you for your support tonight. And this is exactly what Impact is all about, is innovation. It's about leadership. It's about taking no and turning it into a yes. That's what the show's all about, and I hope you learned something from it. And what I'm going to end with today is first breaking here on today's show is that we'll be hosting Impact 250, celebrating our country's 250th birthday, back in Washington, D.C., September 20th through the 23rd. We've got the National Archives, we've got Arlington, we've got the Hay Adams, we've got the top of the Hay, we've got the Deal balcony, and we are creating the most powerful roundtable in the history of our country with policymakers and founders like Ben at the table, creating job growth, creating innovation, and helping our country lead. So with that, I'll be back at you at our next Impact show, and thank you again for being on.